live.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. Warm welcome to all members of the committee and to officers and members of the public. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mr. Hanton, who will deal with the housekeeping issues and items 1 through to 4 on the agenda. Mr. Hanton.
Good evening, members. First of all, the housekeeping notice. Please note that this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee is being recorded by the Council and will be published on the Council's website for a minimum of 6 months. If members of the committee or officers who have been invited wish to speak, please use the raise your hand button feature and switch on your videos. Could members please note that there may be some members of the committee who have given apologies for this meeting for reasons such as self-isolation or illness, and although these members may address the meeting remotely at the discretion of the chairman, they are not able to vote. And finally, Chairman, could members please ensure that background noise is kept to a minimum and that mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you. So,
Thank
Chairman,
you very much indeed, Mr. Hanton.
the agenda. We have received apologies for absence from Councillor Brooke. And incidentally, for information, Councillor Brooke is also apologising for the meeting tomorrow. Moving on to item 2, Chairman, there are no substitute members appointed. And then item 3, can I, through you, Chairman, invite any declarations of interest?
Councillor Brooke.
Sorry.
Councillor Brooke.
Sorry.
Councillor Brooke, did you indicate? No.
No, no, I didn't. I'm on camera and microphone were basically off, and I'm just looking at the attendees.
I see. Thank you very much. Vice Chairman.
Yes, there's an item on the Lower Gardens and a member of the Lower Gardens Trust Board. Thank you.
That's conclude. Susan Zeiss, Chairman.
Ms. Zeiss.
Chairman, I just thought I'd mention that that agenda item is on tomorrow's meeting, so to request Councillor Williams please to repeat his declaration when we get to that meeting tomorrow.
Too many
Lower Gardens
meetings.
Trust. Thank you.
Too many meetings, I do apologise.
Thank you both. Mr. Hanton, item 4 on the agenda, public issues.
Chairman, there are no public issues.
Thank you very much. In that case, we can go to the substantive item on the agenda. By way of introduction, I appreciate that some members have been on audit and governance for a while, others may be relatively new. So what I was going to say was this, that as all members will know, on a number of occasions I've invited suggestions from members of the council about items that they would like the Constitutional Review Working Group to look at. That is a separate subcommittee of the Audit and Governance Committee, chaired by the Vice Chairman of this committee, Councillor Williams, and Vice Chaired by Councillor Butt. And what we've done through that process is to distill through all of the issues that have come forward to us to that working group over a period of time. And as you will recall, as members of the council, the first major set of reviews we brought through to council some months ago. We then went back and started that task again with the remaining items, and those have now come forward to us this evening for this meeting. So that's been the progression. We'll no doubt be doing that again at some time in the future, but for the moment it's a good idea, we felt, to bring those items together in order that we can deal with them and then take them through to council in January. we have had an independent review and challenge undertaken by Wakeman's, and that exercise also drew on best practice. Simon Gocher, the partner at Wakeman's doing this work, was unable to attend this additional meeting tonight and gives his apologies. But perhaps quite importantly, he has indicated that he's able to attend the council meeting in January to respond to specific issues. So the review that we're looking at this evening does include most of the Constitution, but it does not include Part 5, which are the financial regulations, or Part 7, which is the scheme of members' allowances. Apologies if you spot any typographical errors, and there are a few in the revised version. I assure you they will be corrected before they come through to council, and you'll see that that issue is addressed at the second recommendation of the paper. The process, as I see it for this evening, is to work our way through the various items, and I think that Mr. Jones is going to be taking us literally line by line through this, and we will look at the recommendations at each of the 6 stages in that paper, and then at the end of the meeting we'll bring those all together with the first recommendation on your paper this evening, and those 2 recommendations, the one of delegation to Ms. Seiss as the head of legal and bringing those 6 together, hopefully will culminate in something that can then go forward to Audit and Governance tomorrow night and onwards to Council in January. I suppose finally, I should say I've got absolutely no idea how long this meeting is going to take tonight, albeit that at our agenda meeting, when we went through this previously, it took us quite a long time. And so if we find that we are taking a reasonable amount of time, I propose to have a comfort break at 8 o'clock after 2 hours, very short comfort break, when we can resume after that to continue whatever business remains for us to decide upon. I think that covers most of the main points for this evening. So I'll now hand back to Mr. Jones, who can explain the process between this evening's meeting and tomorrow evening's meeting, and then he will run through some general matters about the paper and the proposals in front of you. Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Chairman. So again, thank you for that introduction. So first of all, can I just clarify the process for this evening? The Chairman's just touched on that issue, but just to clarify, so the meeting this evening is a virtual meeting, and as such, councillors are unable to reach a formal decision this evening. But as agreed at the previous meeting of Audit and Governance, this evening is scheduled so that you can have and debate the issues of the changes to the Constitution in a longer period of time than you would normally have in the formal meeting. So this evening, as I said, you will not be reaching a formal decision, but what we hope to have at the end of this evening is to be in a position where we have a series of recommendations from you, having duly debated it and agreed informally what you will then submit as a formal resolution or recommendation to Audit and Governance tomorrow evening. So at the meeting tomorrow evening, those recommendations will then be formally proposed and seconded, and then put to the vote by those councillors who are in attendance this evening. So just to remind you again, members can only make a decision if they are present, and being present means physically in the room at the decision-making meeting, which is tomorrow evening, and therefore in order to do that, you need to be part of the deliberations this evening virtually. Okay. So if I can then carry on, Chairman. Again, just to introduce the item, the agenda pack, when we publish the agenda pack, and we have had communication out to members on this, there's the main agenda pack that includes a copy of the Constitution without track changes showing. We recognise, as the Chairman has alluded to, there are some typographical errors in there, but which we will correct. But that's a clean version that makes it easier to, we're referring to it as a clean version without track changes. It makes it easier to read and digest and understand the context. We published as a supplement a second version of the Constitution with all the track changes showing. Now, at this point, I owe an apology because in the conversion to a PDF, it's brought in lots of different colours in the track changes. So in the original one, they were all shown as red. It's brought in and converted those into different colours. There is no classification in that colour scheme. Please treat them all equally. They are either deletions of text with a strike through or additional text without that strike through going in the track changes. I should also say that there are large chunks with the reorganisation of the Constitution. There are large chunks of data that has been moved and transferred from one section to another. So again, you may see large elements that are in red, but they're actually just a case of moving those from one section to another. The next thing, just in a general context, we will be building content tables and indexes for each part of the Constitution. To do that in a drafting stage is quite challenging, so they will be applied after the Constitution has been approved. And where possible, we have included within the body of the Constitution now appendices and protocols that were previously attached to the previous Constitution. The reason for that, the reason they were originally appendices was in the build-up to LGR and the writing of the original Constitution. The Constitution was built in sort of piecemeal approach, and we identified that we attached those as appendices. So where possible, we've now incorporated those into a single document. And finally, on this side, we've seen over recent months a move towards the use of the word chair when referring to the person presiding at meetings, and for consistency throughout the redrafting of the Constitution, we have changed the words chairman or vice chairman to chair and vice chair. Further point, just to clarify as well, we will be going through the Constitution shortly, myself and Susan Zeiss, in terms of the relevant parts of the Constitution. There will be a number of instances, though, where there are consequential changes being made to one part arising from a substantial change in another part of the Constitution. And I use the example, if I can, just at this point. So Part 3 refers to the potential establishment of a new Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And as a consequence, there are other changes throughout the Constitution. So we may stop you if you start to ask a question about what is technically a consequential change. We may stop that debate if we may or not answer a question at that point and defer that to the point that we refer to the relevant part of the Constitution. So that's a very quick overview of the introduction. And as the chairman said, the intention is to go through each relevant part. So I will deal with the first part of the Constitution, Part 1, the Constitution Summary and Explanation. And as I introduce these, I appreciate that some members will be referring to the agenda pack with the clean version in, and other members may be referring to their version with the track changes showing. So I will refer to, we have two series of numbers, and the first number will always be the main agenda pack, and the second number will be the supplementary pack with the track changes. If anyone needs additional time as I go through to find the relevant location, please just say, and we can pause for breath. So Part 1, Constitution Summary and Explanation, starts on page 15 of the main pack and page 3 of the supplementary pack with track changes.
So just before we get into that Part 1, I should perhaps just inform all members on this call that we do have input from some members and officers who have been either instrumental in bringing these proposals forward or guidance that we might need around specialised areas. And I should further add that Councillor Brooke, who cannot be with us tomorrow night, but he is with us this evening, and I intend to give him my consent to make input as a regular member of this committee, because I think that will be helpful and valuable to us in our decision-making process. So I thought it was important that everybody understood that, and I'll leave Mr. Jones to bring in the officers and members who we know of specific to particular items at the appropriate moment. So without cutting across you again, Mr. Jones, can I take you back to part 1 and the introduction, please?
Thank you, Chairman. No problem at all. Part 1, a relatively short introduction. It sort of introduces the Constitution. There's no significant changes to Part 1. The changes typically provide clarity or correct anomalous references to existing arrangements. But I would just draw your attention, again, it doesn't change. It's arising from an existing policy or strategy. So paragraph 3.6 on page 17 of the main pack and page 5 of the supplementary pack includes reference to the ability for the leader to appoint 6 lead members as part of the cabinet arrangements. They're not members of cabinet, but they the ability to appoint lead members. So that's really the only change in terms of the part 1, Chair, apart from those typographical changes. So I would refer then you to paragraph 19 of the main report, which is the recommendation, which is that it's recommended that the proposed changes to part 1, Constitution Summary and Explanation, be adopted. And of course, this is, I should say as well, not forgetting that recommendations from Audit and Governance from tomorrow's evening's meeting will go to full council for approval.
Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one thing on that one that Richard just pointed out, 3.6. Should we not clarify on there that those lead members should not sit on any overview and scrutiny committee? Because I think that's what we currently have.
Ms. Syce, would you like to answer that one, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm afraid I couldn't get onto the raise your hand function quickly enough. My apologies. Councillor Cox, it's not the case that no lead members are on overview and scrutiny committee, or that there's a prohibition on lead members being on overview and scrutiny. It's more a question of which areas those lead members have in an area of interest over, and whether or not that might clash with the content of overview and scrutiny committee. So as a general rule, it's not advisable for lead members to be on the overview and scrutiny board, but certainly on the adults and the children's overview and scrutiny committees, there's nothing to prevent them from doing so, provided their areas of interest aren't directly those areas that those scrutiny committees will be considering.
So is that advisory? Is that a government advisory, or is that our own regulations that have?
I beg your pardon. I wasn't quite sure.
Is that a government advice, or is that our own?
There's nothing in legislation. There's no provision for lead members in legislation at all. But there is government guidance around whether there are conflicts or not, and how one should address those conflicts. And it's all a question of judgment and interpretation, depending on the facts on the ground. There is also guidance from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, which we have also looked into and had discussions with them about. And all of those recommend that where a lead member has an area of interest that conflicts with an area that's coming under scrutiny, they should not be on that particular scrutiny committee, but that there's no absolute prohibition.
Well, Mr. Chair, through you, could I not suggest that we be a bit more specific in this constitution as to what we should and shouldn't allow? It sounds to me as though we should certainly not allow it on the overview and scrutiny committee board, and then make recommendations as to exactly what Susan Weiss has just said in terms of conflicts of interest.
Ms. Syce?
So, Chair, that is a recommendation we can draft and put in the Constitution for voting at full council, if that's what this Audit and Governance Committee would like us to do. So it would be something along the lines of no lead member will sit on overview and scrutiny board, or no lead member with an area of interest that overlaps with the children's or the adults and health scrutiny committees shall sit on that committee, or something to that effect. I'd have to come up with the absolute drafting, but something to that effect we could put in our constitution, yes, provided there was member support for it, obviously.
That would seem very sensible to me.
We have Councillor Stephen Bartlett on the call, who's the chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Board. Councillor Bartlett, you've indicated you'd like to speak.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I think Councillor Cox has raised an interesting point, but from an Overview and Scrutiny perspective, of course, that no member of the Overview and Scrutiny Board can participate in a debate on an area for which they've been party to the decision. When it comes to lead members, of course, it's very difficult to necessarily be absolutely sure that they may or may not be party to a particular decision, particularly when they're acting collectively as a group within the Cabinet. And therefore, I believe this does need to be clarified so there can be no mistakes. Thank you.
Councillor Brooke.
Thank you, Chair. Just a thought on this. I mean, I agree entirely with what Councillor Cox has been putting forward. If it is agreed, of course, that there's an extra scrutiny committee to do with place or environment, climate or whatever that we've discussed in the past, then that one would also need to be listed in this change.
Yes, I appreciate that, and of course we're getting to that decision later, or that recommendation later on in this meeting, but you're absolutely right. It would therefore apply to all three Overview and Scrutiny committees, and indeed to the board itself. So thank you for that. Just looking to see if I've got any other speakers. No, the other hands gone down. Councillor Cox, your hand is still up. Are you wanting to come back?
No, apologies. I'll reduce it.
So, Ms. Dice, could I just ask you to rehearse again? And I appreciate that you will wish to tighten up the wording, perhaps, at a later time. Could you just rehearse again your understanding of what this amendment actually would mean?
Yes, Chair, and Mr. Jones has kindly helped me to identify in Article 6 of our current constitution a paragraph that says no member of the Cabinet may be a member of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee or any group established by the committees as referenced in paragraph 5 below. I think we could augment something in Article 6 to include the fact that no lead members should be part of Overview and Scrutiny, either just as a statement like that, or if you wanted to refine it slightly to say no lead member whose area of interest, whose nominated area of interest overlaps with the business of that particular scrutiny committee can sit on that scrutiny committee. What Dorset Council has done in their description of their lead members is to make a statement at the bottom of that description saying that no lead member shall sit on scrutiny. That was debated at some length when the lead members came into being, and it was agreed at the time with the leader that, and I think we had discussions at Overview and Scrutiny, I can't remember exactly what happened, but it was decided not to include that particular sentence. So it could also be augmented to include that in the role description, which is published on our website.
You're muted.
In essence, Ms. Sice, you're saying that such members would not be entitled to be on the Overview and Scrutiny Board, but would be on the three committees where their areas of interest do not overlap with the item being discussed.
I think there's a choice, Chair. There's either a complete prohibition on them being on the board or any scrutiny committee, or a prohibition on them only being on those committees where the areas of interest overlap. So in other words, if the lead member for children's, if the lead member for children's, for example, couldn't be on the Children's Scrutiny Board at all, but could still sit on the Overview and Scrutiny Board, but would have to recuse themselves for any matters that came up regarding children's.
I see.
So I think there would be two choices, and perhaps I'm complicating things by indicating that there would be two choices. One would be just a general rule that you need to recuse yourself if something overlaps. And another one would be that you can't sit on that board at all because your area of interest is already in conflict for the whole of the business of that board.
Board or committee?
Sorry, committee, beg your pardon. I'm using the wrong language. Committee.
And in terms of the board?
In terms of the board, I think the best we could do really was to say that should there be business being considered by the board and it overlaps with your area of interest as a lead member, you need to recuse yourself from that item.
So you would have the same ruling for the board as for the committees? It wouldn't be?
For the committees, I would say that all the lead members who don't have the area of interest that overlaps with that committee could sit on that committee.
I see. So we have a choice to take forward members. I haven't seen anybody else indicate on this. I do see a differentiation between the board and the currently two, perhaps later, three committees. If we get that later in this meeting, I see a differentiation between those two. I quite understand that, and I think that differentiation might well provide us with a workable solution. I wondered whether I could ask Councillor Bartlett to come back from what he was saying earlier to see if my interpretation chimes with him as well. Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think that the problem is that there's a degree of subjectivity in this, and I would prefer to see a hard rule stating that, you know, the lead members should not participate in overview and scrutiny committees or board. And I say that because I can just see now some, you know, people objecting to a lead member sitting on a committee because they may have been involved in a debate or a process that comes to a decision at some other forum, and that's, you know, even within a cabinet meeting or something like that. And I can just see it opening up a bit of a Pandora's box there. And so for simplicity and to make sure there's no subjectivity, I would prefer to see a hard rule. That's my personal view, but it's not, the decision's not for me to make here.
No, I value in your position as chair of that board your input, because clearly whatever the outcome, you're going to have to be responsible for making part of this work.
One of the issues is for me is trying to maintain some kind of harmony or a lack, so there's no discourse, unnecessary discourse in overview and scrutiny meetings. It's difficult at best of times, and I think since we've basically had this situation where lead members have not been allowed to participate in overview and scrutiny board, I think that's been a good thing. When it was attempted, there was a bit of a backlash against it when it did happen on one occasion. So you know, I think personally, as the chair of the Overview Scrutiny Board, I would prefer for there to be a hard rule. Thank you,
Councillor Bartlett. Councillor Cox.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with Stephen that I think we're better being hard. I appreciate being hard may be difficult or inconvenient in some instances, but I think we're better off being very clear about the differentiation between the roles of people serving on the cabinet and on the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So I think I would prefer a much harder definition.
Vice Chairman. Yeah,
I tend to agree. I think the blanket view is probably the safest view at the moment, and may I suggest that we've got a long way to go and that we have a quick vote and see which way everybody else feels.
Thank you very much. Has anybody else indicated they wish to speak? Councillor Filer has. There she is. She's turned up on my screen now. Councillor Filer.
Thank you. Yeah, I just need a little explanation. I intend to agree with this. I mean, there are 76 members and probably 15 who would be excluded if this went through. So frankly, I think, you know, if you've got if you've got 60 people to choose from, I don't think it's necessary, but I just want something that Councillor Bartlett said. He said that they shouldn't participate, and that's different from being a member of. So I would hope that lead members would be able to participate at a scrutiny board, even if they couldn't vote, because sometimes their expertise is needed. They might have a particular take. So when we use the word they shouldn't be allowed to participate, I think that's a bit prescriptive. Whereas on the other hand, being a member of, I completely agree.
Well, thank you for that input. I think it was the question in front of us is being a member of. I think perhaps participation is a completely separate matter, a little bit like we're experiencing tonight with members who are not on this particular committee. So if we were to incorporate that across all two, perhaps becoming 3 committees and the board itself as a blanket, it seems to me that that's the consensus coming forward. So rather than going to a formal vote, is there anybody who would be opposed to that going forward? If there is, please could you indicate? No, I don't think anybody has indicated. So could I perhaps on behalf of this committee, Ms. Zeiss, ask you to draw up the formal wording to be incorporated in the draft?
Certainly, Chair, and then I could have that possibly ready before tomorrow's meeting, at which the final decision will be made.
That would be ideal. That would be very, very helpful. Thank you. So that's concluded part 1. I would like to keep some pace going because we've got an awful lot to get through tonight. So if we can try not to repeat points made by others, and then hopefully we'll get through in a reasonable time. So, Mr. Jones, would you like to move into part 2, please?
Thank you, Chairman. At this point, Susan Zeiss is going to introduce parts 2 and 3, I believe.
Yes.
Ms. Zeiss.
Thank you very much, Chair. Councillor Cox, may I just ask if yours is a legacy hand before I come to you again, possibly for another question?
It is in fact.
Thank you. Okay, so in part 2, these are the articles of the Constitution. As Richard alluded to in his introduction, there will be a number of track changes that you'll see when you look at the supplementary pack, but these were really just to bring in consistency, to make things clearer, to tidy up the wording, and so on. And very few of them have any significance, except I would like to refer you to Article 4, which is page 27 of the main agenda pack, the clean one, and 15 of the track changes pack. We have added 2 items to the list of matters that must be agreed by full council. I beg your pardon, we've taken 1 away and added 2. So we've taken away the annual library plan, which is no longer a requirement of the Secretary of State. And we've added 2, which I just need to scroll down to find, which are the corporate plan and the annual senior officer pay policy statement. Now, those 2 should always have been in our main key policy framework, but I think in the hurry to get everything through LGR, it's understandable that 1 or 2 of these things, which are really obvious, were just omitted because possibly they were really obvious. So those were added there to tidy that up. Then if I move you on to page 48 of the main substantive pack and page 36 of the track changes pack, this is where we've removed Article 15. Now, if you remember at the beginning of the first lockdown in the pandemic, we introduced Article 15 into the Constitution to provide for decision making during that pandemic period. And in fact, we kept it in for quite a while until we got to a stage where the pandemic had moved more into business as usual in the authority rather than just responding to an emergency situation. So we felt it wasn't necessary for us to keep Article 15 in anymore, and that all the other ordinary provisions in the Constitution that provided for urgent decisions to be made and so on would do just as well now that we're out of the first critical stage of the pandemic. So Article 15 has been removed. So unless there are any questions on those two amendments, I'd like to refer you. I'll just wait for questions first. I don't see anyone indicating. I fear council. Okay.
Can I just ask, Ms. Seiss, in terms of 15?
Yes.
In the unfortunate and hopefully unlikely event of those having to be reintroduced at a later stage for whatever reason to do with the pandemic and its progress with variants, is that something that can be done fairly readily and then introduced formally at a later stage as it was before?
Yes, I think under our emergency planning rules, generally speaking in the council, Chair, we will be able to introduce quick decision making, even in advance of council having approved an additional article in the constitution. Because
I'm sure that a number of members will be very pleased to take away these issues from the constitution rather than retaining, if you like, those powers. But at the same time, we want to have the comfort of knowing that we can act quickly should we need to again in the future. So we've looked at part 2. Are there any comments from members? Councillor Cox?
Sorry, I've got a couple of queries, and one is to do with 2.53 in terms of exempt and confidential information. I felt that that was a little broad for my liking, and we probably need to define what exempt and confidential is. What one person may feel as though is confidential may not be terribly confidential, particularly if a member of the public could get access to it under freedom of information, for instance. So that was one thing. Shall I go? There's a couple of others. Shall I go through those?
If I could deal with these one at a time, please, because we need to find them page by page. So the one you're referring to, Councillor Cox, is on which page?
24.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that from anybody.
Councillor Wright's 2.5, and it's on page 12 of the track changes.
And 24 of the regular one.
Thank you very much, Vice Chairman. So members can see that. Thank you. Ms. Seiss, could you comment on that, please?
Yes, certainly, Chair. So our constitution defines those categories of exempt and confidential in our access to information procedure rules, which come a little bit later in part 3 of the constitution. So I would need to just double check what that definition is within those access to information procedure rules. So could you bear with me for a moment until I locate those definitions, which may then give some reassurance to Councillor Cox?
Yes, certainly.
Shall I mention the other point, John?
Well, because Ms. Seiss will need to listen to the other point in order to answer you, I expect. That would be my expectation. So hence we'll have to deal with them one at a time.
Thank you very much for bearing with me. It is a question of going back and forth through various versions of the Constitution till you find it. So I'm now on page 101 of the tracked version. I'm really sorry I don't have both versions up in front of me. Richard, 109. 109 of the clean version. And there you will see at paragraph 9.1, there is a definition of confidential and exempt information for the purposes of our Constitution. Of course, that can always be changed, but some of this has its origins in legislative requirements, so we may not be able to change it entirely as we wish.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you. Have you got to that page, Councillor Cox?
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Thank you.
And your next one, please.
The next one is to do with the rights of the public, and that is, I noticed that the public have a right to complain. but there didn't seem to be any right to a response. So you can complain as much as you want, but you don't get any right to get a particular response. And I just felt, particularly in view of recent events, that they should have a right to a response by a certain date. But
can you help us on that, Ms. Syce?
I didn't catch which particular article Councillor Cox was referring to, but in general terms, there is
3.14, which is on page 14 of the track changes.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. I'll find that really quickly. That's no problem. All right. So this is providing feedback. The public has the right to complain to the council where there is an alleged breach of a councillor's code of conduct, and you would like to add a response within a certain time. I can
response, you know.
Sorry, beg your pardon.
Just a right to a response, actually, to be honest. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think I will probably find in the code of conduct that there is, as part of the procedure, the fact that there will be a response given both to the complainant and the person complained of. I'd have to go to refer to that to find the specifics of how to deal with complaints, because they are there in part 6. But in general terms, giving a specific time within which that is done might be problematic, because each code of conduct complaint is different, and some of them require external independent investigation. Some of them are resolved quite quickly. Some of them drag on for an awfully long time because we are gathering information, or we have to rely on various other people's information coming into the process. So I think I would be reluctant to advise on a specific time, but certainly an entitlement to a response, yes. I think Mr. Jones and I must have a look at the procedure for dealing with complaints and cross-reference something to that in this paragraph so that it's clear.
So I'm looking at 3.1.4, which relates to the councillor's code of conduct. Is that the area of complaint that you are raising, Councillor Cox?
It was the one that came to my attention, but I mean a general right of response generally, not just necessarily to
all complaints, because that specific one is about an alleged breach of the councillor's code of conduct, which obviously has its own route through the council anyway, which is separate from this part. So you're talking about complaints in general terms.
Yeah, they should have a right of a response. Yeah.
Right. So Ms. Syce, would you have time to get that to us for tomorrow's meeting, you think?
I would, with a cross-reference, particularly on the code of conduct complaints. But complaints in general is a much wider matter, which is subject to the council's complaints procedure, and that is not at the moment specifically listed in our constitution under the articles, because it's a matter of detail rather than a matter of principle. And I don't feel that should ordinarily sit within the articles of a constitution. I think it forms part of how officers need to behave in the code, you know, the procedures and so on that officers need to follow. And should those not be followed, that should be a disciplinary matter reported to the chief executive or their line manager. That's my advice, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Syce. Thank you. Well, I don't want us to be making this up on the hoof, obviously, and I'm not going to let the meeting go there, am I? Councillor Filer.
Yeah, there are complaints. And there are complainants, and some of whom become regular complainants. And I would be, whereas I think everybody is, I do believe everybody's should be getting a response, an acknowledgement of their complaint. I think that's common courtesy. Councillor Cox, I've got about 4 on the go in my ward alone, not about me, I hasten to add, but there are 3 or 4 complaints about the council, some of which might be quite right and justified, some of which are completely vexatious. So I think it would be, I don't think this should be a constitutional matter. I really don't. I think it should be a matter of common courtesy that if a complaint is received, it should be acknowledged and in due course responded to where possible. I think it will be terribly, it will tie the hands of the council to a huge amount, given the number of people whose mission in life appears to be complaining about anything from, well, all sorts of things. I won't say what they are.
Thank you, Councillor Filer. Are there any others from you, Councillor Cox?
No, there's no others. I just like to. I hear what Councillor Barber is saying, and I probably agree with what she says. But there is a section, Article 3, deals with rights and responsibilities of members of the public, and it strikes me that members of the public do have a right to a response. Clearly can't should be in there, but they should have a right to a response. Whether that's if we're talking here about an article which says rights of the public, members of the public, that seems to me a perfectly legitimate right to have. So I would just add that they don't necessarily need to like the response.
Councillor Rice?
It was on a different topic, so I'll go after Susan's eyes. That's okay.
So, Ms. Ice, I think you're muted.
I wonder whether I've changed something because I muted Surface Hub Town Hall because it was making a funny noise. Sorry about that.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can, Ms. Ice.
Yes, there was a brief technical hitch with our Surface Hub and Mr. Jones has rectified it. I was just going to mention that Richard has found the area in our procedure for dealing with complaints that will indicate that a response will happen and is required. And we were wondering if it would assist the committee if we alerted you to that provision. And that's the one that I will cross-reference into this article as a suggestion for the new draft. Over to Richard.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Chair. So on page 200 of your track changes pack and page 182 of the main pack, there's a section in there which starts on the previous page in terms of the process, but there is a bullet point, 1, 2, 3, the fourth main bullet point down on that page 182, which reads, the councillor and complainant will be kept informed and will be notified of the outcome of the initial consideration by the chair and members of the committee. So there's very much part of that process that we have in terms of acknowledging instantly, and we do have those arrangements in there as well for acknowledging complaints and keeping the complainant informed throughout that process. So that's the provision that Susan Tice will refer to or cross-reference to.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Jones. Councillor Rice.
Yes, it was a very small point just on page 17 of the track changes, 5.4.1D, just removing the chairmanship and changing that to chair. I know that most others have been changed already. There was just one that slipped past there.
That is noted. Thank you, Councillor Rice. I don't think anybody else has indicated.
You've got a couple of legacy hands though.
I think they are legacy. I'm actually not certain. Unfortunately, on my screen, not being that technical, unless you are actually with your camera on, it doesn't always indicate to me who it is who's indicated that they wish to speak, and that hence the delay. So those members who can put their cameras on, it's a great help to me in trying to chair the meeting, I must say. So can we then go to the recommendation at part 2, and could I again ask, are there any members who are not supportive of the proposed changes to part 2? Nobody's indicated, so in that case we can move on to part 3, and this one again is you, I think, Ms. Seiss, part 3.
It is indeed, Chair. Thank you very much. I'm just scrolling down to the relevant part, if you'll bear with me a minute, or less, hopefully. Okay, so part 3 is the responsibility for functions and the officer scheme of delegations. Now, until this draft of the Constitution, our delegations to officers were retained within services. They weren't always immediately visible in one place and convenient for people to refer to. So in the interests of improving the ability of officers and members to understand where delegations lie, we thought it would be advisable to bring them all together into one place. But before we get to the part where I refer to the officer delegations, I'd like to refer you initially to page 60 of the Clean Pack and page 54 of the Track Changes Pack, in which we propose the establishment of an additional place overview and scrutiny committee with responsibility for environment-focused matters. That's paragraphs 4.7 and 4.8. This is a matter that's been debated in various venues and been suggested by a number of members, and in order for it to come into being, it needs to be embedded in the Constitution and agreed by full council. So the direction of travel has been informed by discussion with the ONS chairs. We've had governance workshops on it. Councillors have been engaged, political group leaders and the unaligned councillors. And the proposed additional committee will release pressure on the current board, and I'm sure members will acknowledge that the current Overview and Scrutiny Board has a great deal of business going through it, and the meetings are extremely long. There were 2 meetings every month, starting at 2 in the afternoon and sometimes not ending till 10 or after that at night. It will also provide wider involvement opportunities for some councillors who have a special interest in that area, particularly non-executive members. And the new committee would operate on the same basis as the other 2 ONS committees, the one for children's and the one for the other for health and adult services. So I didn't know whether to pause at that point before we go on to discussing. One other point I need to draw to your attention is that the introduction of a new committee will obviously require that the new chair has a special responsibility allowance, which is likely to be £7,706 per annum, which is the same as the other 2 SRAs for the other 2 chairs. It's not currently in the base budget, but we've asked the Section 151 officer to mention it in his first draft of the new budget. And this committee will be established from May 2022 so that the additional amount can be included in the budget for 2022-23. Chair, I believe you may be on mute.
Thank you very much, Ms. Seiss. Councillor Brooke.
Thank you, Chair. 2 things coming out of that particular paragraph. One is on the 4th line down. It says rod safety and not road safety. And the second point is there are a number of topics within that remit of the committee that would be of interest to perhaps a younger person or someone from outside the council. And I was just wondering whether there is an opportunity here, as with the Children's Overview and Scrutiny Committee, to actually have someone on that committee from outside the council, perhaps a young person who would certainly, I think, be interested in climate change, if not various planning elements as well.
Thank you, Councillor Brooke. I can match your rod safety with one further down in that paragraph where it says flood resilience. But I don't wish to embarrass anybody on this call. We did actually have the caveat at the beginning that
I know, yes,
that officers will go through it and sanitize.
I just wouldn't want a broken rod over my back, that's all.
So thank you for that input, Councillor Brooke. Can I just, Councillor Rice is next.
Yes, I just wanted to query about the TCF mention there, TCF delivery. It just seems a very specific project, whereas the rest of them are ongoing things that we'll be doing for decades, whereas the TCF will be finished in a year and a half. So I just wondered whether that needs to be in there, because it's covered under strategic transport. That was all. And yes, there's a couple of other spelling mistakes as well.
Can you help us on that, Ms. Seiss, or do you want to deal with that outside of this meeting this evening?
No, Chair, I can deal with it briefly. Those are indicative things that might be included on the agenda. We can revise them as we see fit, because the scope hasn't been set in stone. It's here for debate and consideration. So I think that those things that are more short-lived and those things that are longer-lived could live together. But if members would prefer to have only the more strategic areas indicated here and the other ones that come up from time to time to be included, be assumed to be incorporated within that, that's also absolutely fine.
And Councillor Brooks' question about somebody from outside of the council sitting on this particular committee.
Yes, I can also reassure Councillor Brooks that that's perfectly within the powers of this or any scrutiny committee to do, is to invite people to come and give evidence or participate. They won't be voting members, but they can come and give their expertise as and when the committee seeks to invite them. Those can be outside people as well as other people from inside the authority. Councillor Rice, did you want a proposed amendment to that to exclude the reference to TCF?
Well, I couldn't see any others that were temporary. So for consistency, I would suggest removing it.
Chair, through you, that could be amended in the drafting if members of the committee agree.
Right, I'm seeing a few nodding heads from those who are on their cameras. Thank you. Councillor Cox.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is the right place to raise it, but particularly in respect of page 54, but the number of councillors sitting on these committees strikes me as being too many, and maybe this was a time to review that. If we're establishing a new scrutiny committee, and maybe we should just even out the numbers and reduce the numbers on each committee, not just this one, but also you'll not be surprised to learn that I would have a problem with it being added to the budget. I don't see any reason why we should add the cost of this committee to a budget, and it should be apportioned. The cost of committee should be the cost of scrutiny should be apportioned around. I.e., we shouldn't increase the budget.
I think it would be about reprioritising new budget coming into force on the 1st of April 2022, won't it? It's about taking it into account in that budget setting process. I'm wondering if the amount of that SRA in the context of the size of the council's net budget is of significance.
Oh, yeah, materially it will be tiny, but I think it's the way it looks. Basically, it's the
Well, the materiality is a sound point. I suppose this has come forward as a proposed new committee of the council on the basis that the current Overview and Scrutiny Board is somewhat overloaded in work, and to get the work done efficiently requires some changes. Hence the reason this has come forward, and it would be. It wouldn't be within the scheme of members' allowances for one committee not to have an allowance.
No, I'm not suggesting they don't have an allowance. I'm just suggesting the allowances are, we have a budget, we should spread it.
Well, we haven't got a budget yet because the budget for 22-23 hasn't yet been set and agreed by council, and it is proposed that this doesn't come into force until that time anyway.
Yeah.
So I think that's more a matter for the budget debate than it is for our debate tonight. Is the point I'm trying to get to, and I don't think that Audit and Governance really wants to be dealing with other people's business in that respect. Would be my observation. Councillor Filer.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, first of all, I think it's a great idea to have this extra committee, that the work on the main overview and scrutiny panel is so vast, it's very difficult to get through everything properly. Secondly, I would agree with Councillor Brooke that an external person, particularly it could be a young person, though they do sometimes grow older, and you'd have to kick them off the committee, I guess, if they became too old, Councillor Brooke. I don't know, but I don't think it's a question of just calling them in for a bit of expertise. I think it would be a very good idea to have somebody sitting on the committee in the way that you have external people sitting on the children's. I can't see why not. If it can be a young person, then if you are able to change them every 4 years, that would be good. And so the last point is just to go back to budgetary matters. I can't see how you can have the chairman of one important committee. The whole point of establishing this is that they will be doing important work, and I really don't think you can have one chairman who doesn't get his SRA. But as you say, that's a question for budget setting. I think it would be churlish and ridiculous.
Ms. Sykes, did you want to come in on this particular item, this particular part of this item?
On the one before, Chair, I was just going to say that it might be helpful if we indicated that if Council wanted to approve this item and the special responsibility allowance for an additional scrutiny committee, we could undertake a light touch review through the independent review panel. And then, of course, in connection with the numbers of members on various committees, that's for Council to decide at the next AGM whether or not they want to adjust those numbers. Didn't know if that would assist the committee, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Sykes, and I certainly agree with you on the issue of the scheme of members' allowances. I have no intention for this committee getting engaged in that process, as you've probably gathered. On the other issue about the numbers, I think Councillor Cox raises an important point. I'd still like to sort of gather the views of members of the committee. I will come back to you in a moment, Councillor Brooke, but I see that Councillor Bartlett has indicated, and I wonder whether it was on that particular part of the issue.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, it was about the point that Councillor Rice raised about the TCF delivery. I agree with her. It is one project, and in fact it raises the broader point that if you look at the scope of responsibilities set out for the main overview and scrutiny board, they are very generic and strategic, and I felt when I looked at the way this new place committee's responsibilities were defined, they were maybe slightly a bit too specific and maybe should be broadened a bit. And the reason I say that is that a lot of discussion went into the various divisions, and there will always be some particularly areas of overlap, particularly around regeneration projects, and it's going to need a lot of discussion between the various chairs to ensure that things are put in the appropriate place. And I don't think we can actually specify all of that in the statements of responsibilities within the Constitution. I think it's much better to leave them as broad as possible, but a caveat or a statement that chairman will liaise to agree the forward plans for the various overview and scrutiny meetings. And I think that's a better way to approach it rather than be too specific.
I share that concern to some extent. Could we just deal with that? I'm wondering whether a better way of that being drafted would be to list those such as those various issues, but to incorporate what I think is probably the more important issue, which is the discussion between the four chairs around the issues you've identified. I think that has greater value to it in terms of the business that you conduct. So if that satisfies it, I think would that be a way forward, Ms. Sykes, that could be modified within the current drafting?
Yes, indeed, Chair. I think it was always intended for those categories to be indicative, so we'll make sure that the drafting reflects that.
Yes,
and
it
also
does at the moment, and I think it necessarily should. It is too prescriptive, and I could lead to conflict later on, I suspect.
Indeed. So I won't be able to come up with the drafting during the course of this meeting,
No.
but if we could try and do it overnight and have something ready for tomorrow evening that, well, I don't know, Chair, whether you want that, because we're not going to reopen the debate tomorrow evening.
No, we're not. So the way forward, I would suggest, is that as long as it's within the spirit of what this meeting this evening is recommending, then I think that's probably as close as we can get. And unless there's something really striking that comes about out of that redrafting, I would find it hard to believe that the committee tomorrow will have any issue with that.
Indeed, Chair. Thank you, Chair. And perhaps I could allow you and Councillor Williams to have sight of it before the several hours before the meeting, just to confirm that.
Well, I think actually I'd be probably happy for all members on the committee to see it, because we would like to deal with those issues prior to 6 o'clock tomorrow evening if we possibly can. And I think that's probably, it's unlikely, I think, that anything will come back, but it gives the members the opportunity to do so on these and indeed any other issues.
We will do that, Chair, and we'll incorporate the requirement for liaison between the committee and the board chairs.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Does that answer your concerns there, Councillor Bartlett?
Yes, it does, Chair. Could I just raise one more point, if I may, about participation, or as a member or an external, maybe members of the public on the board itself or the committees themselves. This is not an idea that has been discussed, and it's a shame really, because we've actually been sort of looking at these matters since over a year now, in fact. So it's the first time I've really thought about it this evening, and my initial reaction is no, we shouldn't be doing this. And the reason is that one of the functions is to test and challenge the portfolio holders, the council, the cabinet, etc. I'm not sure that is really a task for a member of the public. They do that through the committees that are established democratically with the representatives. So I've got some reluctance about involving other parties in that particular role. If you need if you need expert advice from the public or an area, you can invite them in and to participate in a particular meeting. But I wouldn't see anybody being on the committee as a sort of a permanent member or anything like that. So unless I've got that completely wrong, I'm not sure that was the intention of Councillor Brooks' suggestion, but just in case it was, I would certainly, I think I'd be against it.
Well, right on cue, Councillor Brooke has indicated that he would like to speak, so I'm sure he'll answer for himself. Councillor Brooke.
Fine, thank you. So I was wanting to come back on some of the comments. And first of all, can I thank Councillor Filer for giving me support, even though Councillor Bartlett isn't doing. I mean, that's 1-1, isn't it? Or still, with my view, 2-1. Now, I was just coming back to say that I was thinking in terms of a permanent member of the committee, and also if certainly a pool, the external people on the Children's and Education Committee could actually vote. I don't know what the position was in Bournemouth, and I'm not sure what the position is currently in BCP on that particular matter. But I think it's often a very, very useful thing to have someone permanently on, as opposed to just bringing someone in on the odd occasion, because 9 times out of 10 we forget to do that anyway, and therefore you miss a number of opportunities. But I agree with the constitution change at this point in time. What we're proposing, this debate really needs to be looked at, perhaps on a future occasion, because we can't, as Councillor Bartlett has rightly said, we can't really open the debate on this tonight. But I thought I would raise it, as there is this opportunity for a new committee. It's a good opportunity to look into that proposition.
Thank you, and I agree with you. It's not something which we can introduce this evening into this part of the process. However, as I said at the very start, the process of constitutional review is alive, is a moving issue, and no doubt members will have plenty of other issues as well as yours, Councillor Brooke, to bring back to future meetings. What I wouldn't want to see, I think, at this stage would be to circumvent the process when we get through audit governance and through to full council without having gone through the proper process of the constitutional review steering group first, because therein lies the issue of not getting proper discussion out of an informed debate necessarily, because we can't bring in expert advice from outside, such as that from Wakeman, which is part of this process. So provided you agree with that principle, I think we're on the same ground.
Yes, certainly, Chair.
And then in terms of the numbers, the point that Councillor Cox raised earlier, again, I think that probably falls into a similar category. In terms of, we've got, I think, 11 for each of the committees under this latest proposal, and I think it's 14 on the main board, is it?
Mr. Jones is checking, Chair, if you wouldn't mind bearing with us for a moment.
Well, Councillor Bartlett probably knows the answer without rehearsal.
There are 15 currently on the ONS board.
15. But I'd like to ask for your advice, Ms. Seiss, from Councillor Cox's point earlier. I don't know that we can necessarily change that on for this evening. It's again an item to come back to a future constitutional review steering group meeting, isn't it?
That's correct, Chair. And in fact, full council, in addition to changing the constitution, needs to agree the numbers on committees. But Indeed. We can't change that this evening, no.
So, Councillor Cox, I'm with you on that, but I think we've taken it as far as we can for this evening. There is somebody else indicating, but I can't actually see who it is. Could somebody help?
Yeah, it's myself, Councillor Rice.
Oh, Councillor Rice.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight in the chat about this humming feedback. It seems to go away when Susan Seiss speaks. So it seems to be related to the Hub Town Hall, but it is quite distracting. So it was just to raise that in case you hadn't seen the chat. And another very small point, page 64 on the one with track changes, 11.3.5, there's a chairman there again, just for removal. Thank you.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Rice. We tried to catch them all, but there might be one or two that we've missed, so we'll go through it thoroughly again. And we'll try and address that humming noise. We have had it reported to us in previous occasions when we use the hub, but it's only Mr. Jones and I here this evening, so I'm not sure when one or other of us will have the chance to dash out and try and fix it. We'll do our best.
Thank
You're
you.
on mute, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Rice. Nobody else has indicated, I think. Ms. Seiss.
Thank you, Chair. All right, I'll move on then now to page 64 of the clean copy and page 58 of the track changes copy to paragraph 7 that deals with the Appeals Committee. Now, this still remains in the Constitution. It's the Appeals Committee for Employee Appeals. The Constitution Review Working Group considered a request to change the responsibility of the Appeals Committee to effectively remove the consideration of employment appeals against dismissal. The proposal suggested that these appeals be heard by independent senior council officers, but the working group were minded not to support this change and requested that the matter be brought to the attention of the Audit and Governance Committee to determine. So in other words, Constitutional Working Group had a look at it. It was proposed that this be amended. We had a paper from an officer who came and explained the position and the reasons why. The committee felt that they didn't want to take that decision without referring it first to Audit and Governance for consideration. So that's where we are this evening.
Thank you. Will I test the temperature of the committee tonight? Councillor Filer.
Thank you, Will. This is something that I feel really strongly about. in Bournemouth, I've not done it here, but in Bournemouth, I was chairing that appeals committee at a very turbulent time, and it was quite perverse. I felt that we made inquiries, and there are many councils throughout the country, in fact, the majority of councils throughout the country, for employment appeals. They are not heard by members. These are quasi-judicial, and I don't believe that members have the right expertise. We have a certain amount of training, but it's not training which can satisfactorily transfer, for example, to a 4 or 5 day employment tribunal, which would be held in another city, often in Southampton. It's embarrassing. I think if a person is properly dismissed for an offence which warrants dismissal, it can be really difficult for senior officers to have to take them back because a panel of 4 or 5 members without the appropriate training can overturn their decision. It puts senior officers in a very difficult position, especially with the staff that they work with. And I just don't see. I think all the other appeals are absolutely the function of the appeals committee, but I feel that when it comes to the most difficult employment tribunals, which can cost the council an enormous amount of money, and if there's a word said out of place, it can be very, very destructive. I really feel that this particular function should be removed from the remit of the appeals committee.
Thank you, Councillor Feiler. Councillor Cox.
Thanks. This might be a bit of a technical question, but it's to do with 8.5 and to do with the suspension of relevant officers, because it does say paid service. Now, I think at a recent committee meeting, I can't remember which one, it was clear that there was quite a senior member of the council, a senior employee of the council that was not an employee, that was being paid through a limited company. And how does 8.5 affect circumstances where this takes place? Not that I think that this should take place these days, because I think it's pretty much banned by the HMRC. I just thought that's a great point.
I'm here, Chair. I didn't quite hear what Councillor Cox was saying. I'm terribly sorry. Perhaps our hand is not very distinct this evening.
I think Councillor Cox was querying in 8.5 the legitimacy of those who are not employees of the council but are on contracts outside of the council, and whether that is covered within here or not.
Just to clarify then, Councillor Cox, did you mean that the head of paid service might not have the ability then to suspend officers who are not in the permanent employ of the council? I think I might have misunderstood that entirely. I'm not quite sure what you're asking. That clause 8.5 says that that the head of paid service has delegated responsibility for suspension of relevant offers in the event of the need for urgency. Are you concerned about that provision?
Well, insofar as that it would cover if that officer in question was not a paid employee but was operating through a limited company, which I understand one officer is at the moment. So I just wondered, does this paragraph cover that situation?
Okay, so I would have to come back to you on that, please, Councillor Cox. I don't have enough information at my disposal to answer that question at the moment. I also may be in conflict because I'm advising the head of paid service on current grievances. May I ask one of my colleagues to come back to you with an answer after this meeting? You're not proposing a change to that section of the Constitution, are you? Thank you.
No, I think it's for information only, Ms. Seiss. So could I revert back to the point that Councillor Feiler was raising? And I made the leap of thinking that that's what Councillor Cox was going to be speaking to. So what Councillor Filer was raising was what I think is included under Appeals Committee at 7.11, personnel related appeals in respect of decisions made which result in a dismissal, and the issue that there was I think a majority decision within the working group, and that's why it's come back to here with that preamble from Ms. Seiss earlier on. I know where I stand in this particular matter, but I want to just test whether or not members of this committee tonight are content to keep in 7.11, or if they would go back to the original draft, which did not include 7.11. Councillor Filer has spoken strongly with, I think, very legitimate reasons why it should be taken out. If I'm not misinterpreting what you've said, Councillor Filer, and I just want to gauge the rest of the committee's views on it so that we can move on, please. Councillor Cox.
I agree 100% with Councillor Filer. So.
Well, without leading from the chair, I do too, and from my experience, I think it is probably, I would put it as strongly as misguided to retain 7.11. I think it is wrong-footed to put it back in, and I think it's advancement to take it out. Councillor Rice.
Yeah, happy for it to be removed.
So, is there anybody who dissents from that? Is there anybody who wants to keep it in? No, it would appear not. So, Ms. Seiss, I think. Oh, Councillor Brooke.
I didn't think I was a lone voice at the last time we discussed this. I think Lawrence at least was supporting me as well. I do still have reservations about removing it basically for the reasons I gave last time, when officers did actually dismiss or recommend a dismissal for an officer, and it was totally and utterly the wrong decision, as we went on to demonstrate. And with the support of HR, I'm not sure that there are any issues quite as that would need a reaction quite as strongly as Councillor Filer's in this instance. Whereas I thanked her for her support earlier on. I think we're in disagreement on this one. But if I'm not on the committee tonight or tomorrow, so I can only just say that is what my view and feeling is and was when we discussed it.
Thank you very much. Of course, if a decision is made which is then challenged, it no doubt ends up at an employment tribunal anyway. Vice Chairman.
Yes, I stand by both Councillor Brooke and my original decision. We debated it quite extensively, and I think we came to the conclusion, the majority of us, not in all of us, the majority, that we should have it left in. But I'll leave Daniel Buck to come back as Vice Chair of the Constitutional Steering Group.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with what Mike Brooke has said here, and what Lawrence has said. I go for, I don't want to remove this from the paper. Thank you.
And Councillor Filer.
Well, I'm just going to stand by what I said before, and I think for your average everyday appeal, a dismissal appeal, I understand how those who don't want to remove this appeal. But there was a case in Bournemouth when a very senior officer took the council to employment tribunal, and the chairman of the appeals committee, which was not me, was in Southampton for the best part of 3 weeks, every single day. I don't know if she was subpoenaed to be there, but she had to be there every single day. And it was really tough. She didn't have the training, didn't have the knowledge. It was very, very difficult for the council. And and it ended up with an awful lot of money for the council. We're not talking here about, what we were saying before about a chairmanship. We're talking about lots and lots of money. And I think when you're dealing with public money and you've got a situation where you're in an appeals tribunal with highly paid barristers asking you questions, and you're a humble member of the council, as we all are, or maybe not so humble in some of our cases, I just think it puts people in a very difficult position.
Thank you, Councillor Fowler. Councillor Brooke, have you indicated again speak on?
That was a legacy.
It was, okay, thank you. And Vice Chairman, is yours a legacy or is it?
No, it's not. I've got a bit of my voice back now. The licensing board have the same sort of powers. Yes, sometimes things don't go as they should do, and you have to go to court or to the magistrates, and you can win or you can lose. But as you said, Councillor Fowler, the majority of these cases go through. They don't go to court, and I think for the very occasional one, we should have councillor inclusion.
Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just for what it's worth, of course, in industry, you don't have the luxury of a sort of a second house being available to represent the interests of the staff. Effectively, you have an appeals process which is dealt with by the executive team within a company, and of course, you've got the professional advice and of the HR department, who, let's face it, are the experts in this area, and they should be allowed to run those disciplinary processes, and provided our process involves the ability to appeal to the next level up and within the executive, well, that's fine. That's the way it works in industry. I don't see why it can't work the same way. And I think there are dangers involving members in that process in terms of qualification, experience, expertise, etc. And having had to represent my own company in an appeals tribunal, then I understand exactly where she's coming from. So I don't think it's a good idea.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. Councillor Phipps.
Yeah, I haven't said anything yet, so I've just been listening, and I think probably rather than sitting on the fence on this, I would go with Councillor Brooke and Councillor Williams on this. So I'm not going to say any more, but I think I probably ought to, say where I stand. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So when we come to the recommendation, we will need to deal with this issue specifically in terms of how many support and how many don't. In the meantime, could I ask Ms. Seiss to carry on to the next part of Part 3?
Yes, certainly, Chair. And just to reassure members, we are trying to reduce the humming. We've tried one or two things which appear to make it worse at the moment, but we'll keep trying, and forgive us for the interruption of that noise. It must be very annoying. Can I take councillors now to page 64 of the clean copy and page 58, oh, beg your pardon, page 66 of the clean copy and page 60 of the track changes copy, which shows in red, I hope, not blue and all sorts of other colours, a list of local choice functions. These weren't in the Constitution before. It's not a legal requirement for them to be in there, but we just felt with Waitmans that it was best practice to have them listed so that it's clear for everyone who wants to interpret this area what they are. So a list of local choice functions which may or may not be the responsibility of the executive. It doesn't change the current Constitution, it just adds this piece of information for clarity. Okay, so if there are no questions on that, I'll move on, Chair, with your permission.
If you could carry on, Ms. Seiss, yes, please.
Thank you. Then page 72 of the clean copy and 66 of the track changes copy. We are now getting to the main scheme of delegation to offices. This is where, as I said right at the beginning, we've drawn into the Constitution delegations that were previously existing in the various services, just to have them all visible and in one place. And we've also filled in some gaps by using comparisons to best practice constitutions that we were referred to by the LGA, and that was Cornwall Council's constitution, as well as we looked at Dorset's constitution and some others. And we brought in a set of delegations which doesn't contradict what happens at the moment, but at least puts everything in one place and visible for all to see. I think this is particularly good for officers who are new to the authority or new to local government, to be able to refer to this really easily and quickly to see the parameters within which they can operate. Some specific delegations I'd like to refer the committee to are the first one on page 95 of the clean copy and 88 of the track changes copy, which is the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, that's the RIPA Act delegations. During the course of this year, we had an inspection from the RIPA commissioner, and there were some recommendations that they made to us. This wasn't one of them, but as a result of having had that inspection and learning from that experience, we felt we ought to put the delegations in here so that everyone knows who's responsible under that legislation. Then the second point is page 95 on the clean copy and 89 on the track changes copy. These are the explicit delegations of the proper officer for specific functions. You'll find all throughout local government legislation references to the proper officer. I think it's really clear for us to have them written into the Constitution so everyone knows who the proper officer is in certain circumstances. So that again is not an amendment, it's an addition of extra information for clarity. And then lastly, one which may be of specific interest to councillors, page 100 of the clean copy and 93 of the tracked changes copy, a statement of the councillor and officer indemnities. Now, I must point out to councillors that these may have financial implications, and we have as yet not fully understood what those might be. We think that our current insurers will cover all of the financial implications here, as they would have had to do, because the provision of indemnities for councillors and officers is a requirement of the law in the Local Authorities Indemnities for Members and Officers Order 2004. And none of this goes outside of what is a requirement of that legislation. So we think our insurance has got it covered. We are just absolutely dotting the I's and crossing the T's with finance in case they need to raise the possibility of this being an additional financial burden on the council in the next year's budget. But I don't think that my advice would be that doesn't mean that this committee could not recommend the matter to council. If there is a financial implication, we will know that by the time this goes to council and we'll be able to inform councillors then.
Thank you very much, Ms. Seiss.
So that brings us to the recommendations for that section.
Could I, Councillor Phipps?
Thank you. Could I just go back to page, hang on, 87?
Which version? 87, please.
Oh, 87 in the track changes. And it's in the table at the top, B. This is to do with planning, and it's delegations. The determination of any such application, whether to require, impose any condition, etc., etc. And then it goes on, but excluding the determination of any such application that's expressly identified as being the responsibility of the Planning Committee in Part 3, Section 2 of the Constitution. I just wondered if either Richard or Susan could just tell me what those exclusions are, because I presume it's when there's a call in or something. Could you just tell us what those are? I just want to be clear on it, please.
Can you help us on that, Ms. Seiss?
Yes, certainly, through you, Chair. Councillor Phipps, we're just looking up, getting up on our screens that reference to Part 3, Section 2. We'll be back in a minute.
Thank you. I can't hear what Ms Syce is saying.
I'm speaking to Councillor Jones. I beg your pardon, Councillor Phipps. I'm on mute for the moment, just while the two of us find the. Okay, Councillor Phipps, having read up to the beginning of that section, these are delegations given to the Chief Operating Officer to make or delegate down to further officers within planning various decisions, except for those decisions that have to be taken in planning. So I can't list all those for you right now, but in planning law, there are certain decisions that have to be taken by the planning committee and others that can be taken by planning officers. So that delegation to the Chief Operating Officer would be to the corporate director responsible for the planning team, in which those planning officers sit, who can take delegated decisions, except for those that are required to be taken by planning. Now, I can certainly get you the information about which matters are only allowed to be taken by planning, but that's not really a constitutional issue, except that we need to not delegate to the Chief Operating Officer anything else that in law needs to be taken by a committee. We may have Nick Perrins on the line. I think he is there. I don't know, Nick, whether you would like to add anything, Chair, through you, because you are our head of planning.
Mr. Perrins, can you help us, please?
I will certainly try, Chair. Thank you for bringing me in. Yes, Councillor Phipps is essentially correct insofar that councillor call-ins and things like that, they are specifically set out in I think it's part 3. So it's basically all the provisions which require applications to go to planning committee, including councillor call-in, or perhaps an officer referral, or things like major planning applications on a council owned land. They all automatically go to planning committee, set out in I think it's part 3 of the Constitution. So this is just tying up those two sections together, basically distinguishing between what can go forward as officer decisions and what has to go to planning committee. But it's, yes, it's all set out in the other parts of the Constitution. That helps.
Thank you. It's just I couldn't see it anywhere, and I just wanted to be clear. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Is there anything else, Councillor Phipps? No. Jolly good. So that takes us to the recommendation. Before I deal with the recommendation, we have, I think, probably agreed everything apart from the issue of the appeals committee. And I just want to see which way we want to go so that we can come out of here with something that we can take through to tomorrow night and then as a recommendation on to council in January. So could I just have an indication, please, of how many members of this committee actually support the line that is currently in the drafted constitution, which includes employee decisions of the appeals committee? So how many members is that, please? I really need you to indicate with a hand, I think, because you're not all on camera at the moment, so I can't judge those that are not on camera.
Should we ask councillors to raise their hand as if they want to speak, Chair, for the purposes of this vote? Would that help?
That's what I've asked for, yes.
Yes, please could you raise your electronic hands as if you wish to speak, if you're in favour, members.
Sorry, can you just clarify in favour of
in favour
retaining?
In favour of the draft constitution that's in front of us this evening, which includes that as being part of the remit of the appeals committee. So how many do you have there, Ms. Syce? Because I have hands which don't have names to them because they're people who are not who haven't got their cameras on.
I have 4, Chairman.
4. Right, and could I then gauge if there are 4? Can we just be clear so that we haven't made any mistakes? So that's Councillors Williams, Butt, Phipps, and Fear. Is that correct? Have I missed anybody?
I'm checking because Councillor Fear may have taken his name down, his hand down.
I'm sorry, there's not a better way of doing this, but it's the only way we have.
Councillor Fear, please can you confirm you were the fourth councillor?
I was, yes.
Thank you, that's correct, Chair.
There's 4. And could I then see how many there are who hold the contrary view? That is that we should take that out of the proposed draft constitution.
Chairman's casting vote.
So, Chair, I also have that as 4. Yourself, Councillor Cox, Councillor Filer, and Councillor Rice.
So that's only 8 who have voted.
Only 8 voting this evening, Chair.
Out of 10.
Bob, can you confirm, please, how many members are on this call that are actually attending and participating so that we can be sure, please?
There's 9 members on the committee, Chairman.
Yes,
and there's 8 present voting.
There's only 8 voting, yes.
Yeah, because of Councillor Brooke, yeah.
Because Councillor Brooke is not included tonight. Yes, I understand that. Well, reluctant as I am to use my casting vote, we've got to move on. Obviously, this issue, if members are not satisfied, this issue will no doubt be debated in full council in January when the recommendations come forward. So obviously, I will be supporting removing this item from the draft constitution as far as personnel and appeals are concerned. So, Ms. Syce, can we note that, please, for tomorrow night? And then can we now move on to the recommendation of all of these issues which have come through in part 3 this evening? Is there anybody who dissents from that? Councillor Cox, your hand is still up. Is that? So can that be agreed that we've agreed the recommendations that have been set out in part 3 as amended? Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. So moving on now to part 4, that's back to you, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies to members for the audio issue. I think it's actually where the microphones in the committee suite here are turned off for a long period of time, then you get that humming sound. So periodically I may just turn my microphone on and off just to reset that if that's causing an issue. So please bear with us. So part 4 procedure rules starts on page 105 of the main pack, the clean pack, and 97 of the supplementary pack. I mentioned earlier on around one of the principles here was around bringing together appendices and consolidating various parts of the Constitution. In the existing Constitution as published, we have 14 parts to Part 4, including appendices, subparts, and other bits and pieces. The work that we've undertaken here in most parts doesn't change the fundamental core elements of the procedure rules, but we've got that now down to it's 5. I think the report says 4, but I omitted to include the employee procedure rules, or the employment procedure rules. So we've now got that down to 5 core components. In terms of some general layout issues, so in terms of the Constitution now, or the procedure rules, we are referencing in the left-hand margin. You'll see a note where there's a legislative framework to the procedure rule. This is useful so that it's clear that we cannot suspend or alter that procedure rule. So if its source is legislative regulation, then we clearly can't amend that. So that's the reason for that reference. And you'll see as we go through, mainly in part 4D, but we've also included into part 4D is the meeting procedure rules. We've included a reference where those procedure rules apply to specific meetings or types of classification of meetings. So generally speaking, parts 4A, B and C, which is the information procedure rules, cabinet and overview and scrutiny, haven't changed to a material extent. They are generally moving things around and reordering content. I should say that there is a reference, and if members are looking at 4A, there is reference in there to, and forgive me, let me get the page. So it's page 46 of the, no, it's not, apologies. There's reference in there. One of the principles that the working group were keen to do was to ensure that we maintain the momentum in terms of electronic serving of documents for our sustainability and green agenda. So there's a general principle in the information procedure rules that maintains that procedure. That was previously in Article 15, which you referred to earlier on as being removed from the Constitution, but that's a principle that is now being held throughout the Constitution document. So if I can move on to part 4D, and the first item here is on page 136 of the Clean Pack and 129 of the Track Changes version. And I'm just going to jump to that one myself. Okay, and Chairman, I think Councillor Butt is on the call, the Judith Butt is on the call. So this is in relation to Procedure Rule 1.1, although that doesn't appear on that page. Just bear with me a second, Chairman. I think I might have the wrong page number. No, I've got it now. That's it. Yeah, so page 129 of the Track Changes version and 136 of the Clean version. So paragraph 1.9, the working group considered a request to have an August or consider an August recess. Clearly, we're a large council. We have lots of business going through, and the view there, I believe, paragraph 1.1 now reflects that, is to have a general principle of avoiding August for scheduling of extraordinary meetings, workshops, briefings, and non-essential meetings. So as far as practically possible, we will avoid August when setting our schedule of meetings. I don't know if you want to stop at that point, Chairman, or whether you wish me to carry on with all the provisions. Clearly, we have been stopping at each one at the moment, but I'm conscious of time. Sorry, you're on mute, Chairman.
So as long as we are all conscious of time, members, I think I'd like to bring in Councillor Judith Butt now, who wishes to address this particular issue. It was one that she brought to the Constitutional Review Steering Group originally, and I've agreed that she should speak to the committee tonight to set out her position. Councillor Butt.
I'm grateful to you, and I'm very mindful that the hour is late and we're going on a little. I will be as brief as possible. My presentation is about 3 minutes, but it does give the backstory, Mr. Chairman. I hope that members will indulge me. Thank you for your time. Mr. Chairman, members, on the 23rd of July this year, I emailed all BCP members, the Chief Executive, the Monitoring Officer, and Karen Tompkins as Head of Democracy, asking for agreement that August, which has always traditionally been a members' recess month, be officially adopted in our BCP constitution as such. I was invited to present a proposal regarding an August recess to the CWP on the 7th of August and was pleased to advise the committee of the following. An August recess is acknowledged practice in most councils. In comparison, Parliament's summer recess is mid-July to first week in September, covering the 6-week summer holiday period, establishing the common practice of recess, giving MPs an opportunity to concentrate on their constituencies, catch up on current workloads and plan for the following year, and also enjoying time with family and generally recharge batteries ready for the busy September parliamentary sessions and the continuing cycle of works. This concept and practice can easily translate at local government level for the shorter period of the month of August, offering similar opportunities to local councillors and officers equally deserving of some annual respite, furthering the opportunity for councillors to concentrate on the wards and for officers to concentrate on their own departmental casework and general catch-up, with officers also benefiting from less call on them during this period regarding meetings and the general council demands on their time and expertise. Therefore, we would need to ensure that the annual calendar of meetings for each municipal year is well planned in terms of corporate strategy, statutory requirements, and all council managerial arrangements. This is pivotal to sound governance of the council. Thus, in order to be able to take full advantage of this, we need to avoid substantive formal councillor meetings, councillor training and seminars, unnecessary councillor briefings, and to ensure the 6 weekly informal group leaders briefings do not fall during August. All subject, of course, to not disrupting the need to transact normal and urgent council business where necessary. These are the key drivers. We'll need to hold some meetings to ensure timely decision-making cycles. For example, informal briefings with the Cabinet to agree content of Cabinet papers for the September Cabinet cycle, and any necessary reactive meetings of any number of councillors and officers regarding any specific emergency unforeseen issues that may arise. It is easily possible to accommodate our overview and scrutiny board meetings in early September so that Cabinet can be held in mid-September and full council to follow that in late September as normal. Full planning and licensing subcommittee meetings during August will always be required. However, with careful preparation, the planning committee could meet in the early part or late part of the month, allowing the rest of the month to be left free for them. Licensing, regrettably, under law is required to convene subcommittee hearings 2 weekly, often held weekly. This cannot be avoided as it's a statutory requirement and it is accepted as such. The Chief Executive, the Council Leader, the Leader of the Unity Alliance and independent members have advised me that they are in broad agreement the Council has the capacity to support a formal August recess month, but to ensure that it doesn't impede the required work of the Council and that this can be achieved with efficient forward planning of the Council's corporate meetings calendar. Thus, the August workload can be kept to the bare minimum for all councillors, as Mr Jones has just advised us, and staff members alike. I am grateful for the many comments and contributions received in support of the proposal, and that the CWP have also offered broad agreement to my proposal and seconded by Councillor Vicky Slade at the October 7th meeting. Therefore, Mr Chairman, in conclusion, I ask that, subject to agreed conditions, August be officially adopted in our BCP constitution as elected members recess month, that this to be formally considered this evening as seconded by Councillor Vicky Slade, and thence referred to full council in January for a full decision. Thank you, Mr Chairman. Thank you, members, for your time.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Butt. As we've been doing, we'll deal with this issue in the order that Mr Jones has set out. Nobody's indicated that they wish to speak. So, Councillor Cox.
I just wanted to put on record that I'm against it. I think it's not right that we should do that. We're not French after all, so I don't think we should be setting a month aside not to do anything. So I instinctively, I'm afraid I'm against it.
Councillor Phipps.
Yeah, I wouldn't be supporting what has just been recommended either. I'm afraid. I think this is a big council. The workload is high. I think the wording that is in there that I can't remember. I haven't got it in front of me. I'd have to bring back another page on the screen for the wording. That is it recommended that. Yeah. And where practically possible, the month of August should be avoided when scheduling meetings, and I think that's good enough. I really don't think that we need to just put a moratorium on it, that actually, no, we're just not doing anything in August. I'm sorry, can't go along with that. That's just my view. Thanks.
I wonder, Mr. whether you could just give us your view on whether what we've just heard concurs with what is in 1.1 of the draft.
Yes.
I think there might be a bit of a difference in there, actually.
So 1.1 of the draft says it says full council will determine the annual schedule of meetings. Sorry to read it all out, but probably best to go from the beginning. Annual schedule of meetings for the council, cabinet committees and subcommittees, including the date, time and location. Where practically possible, the month of August should be avoided when scheduling meetings, briefings, workshops, training and extraordinary meetings. Meetings, full stop. There will be a general presumption against alterations to the date, time and venue for the meetings. So in other words, where practically possible, August will be avoided, but it's not a moratorium. And in fact, Chair, I don't think it's possible for us to place a moratorium, because that would then mean a change to the Constitution should we need to bring forward an extraordinary meeting for whatever reason.
And I think that's what Councillor Butt was proposing. And I don't think what Councillor Phipps has just said is in opposition to that. It was about having a moratorium, which I don't think this is proposing to do anyway. Is that interpretation correct, Ms. Syce?
Yes, I think Councillor Phipps was suggesting that we keep the wording as currently drafted, if that's correct, Councillor Phipps, and not go further than what's currently drafted.
That's my understanding of it. Yes. So I don't think anybody wants to go any further than that. Is what I'm trying to just drag out of the conversation. Thank you. Councillor Filer, did you indicate you wish to speak? No, you don't. I think I saw Councillor Daniel Butt on here. Did you wish to speak?
Just like to say, Chair, that I support this to go through.
Thank you. I have hands up from Councillor Cox. Is that a fresh hand? And I have Jude Butt, Councillor Jude Butt, hand up as well. Did you wish to come back?
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly.
I'm very happy with the track changes which are in the Constitution, and I believe that I outlined those in full in my speech as to exactly what I was asking for, as supported by all those people who I sought reference to. And obviously it is where practicable, and obviously it is subject to agreed conditions, which obviously are where practicable. But I don't believe that to say that we're not going to do anything in August, as one member has said, is a nonsense. Of course we're going to do things in August, but we are going to try our very best if we can, for the good benefit of staff and councillors, to try and have a break in August, if at all possible, around the required business of the council. I do not see that as anything which is untoward, and I do not see that it's not possible that we can't do that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm grateful for your time.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Butt. I don't have anybody else who's indicated on this item. So could we move on, Mr. Jones, through the rest of procedure rule part 4?
Thank you, Chairman. So my next reference is in relation to petitions to council, page 146 of the main pack, or 139 of the track changes. The working group received a request to automatically refer all petitions to another body or committee upon receipt at council. The working group considered that. Paragraph 12.22 sets out the current arrangements in a list of options available to full council that it may deal with a petition in a particular way. The working group were of the view that to stipulate that it must be referred to another committee or body could delay action arising from a petition, which may be relatively straightforward, and therefore you felt that the existing provisions were flexible enough to deal with petitions appropriately as council wished to proceed. So you weren't recommending any changes, but I drew it to your attention as it was an item that was put forward by a member. Do you wish me to continue, Chairman? At that point, I'm not seeing any immediate. Is there an immediate hand shot up? Councillor Butt, is that an old hand? I presume. I think
it's an old hand.
Okay, so if you allow me to continue, then, Chairman. So
apologies.
Yes, but I think have you missed a bit out before that?
They were in the wrong order in terms of the page numbers, Chairman. So if you indulge me, so that was page 146.
Okay.
I noticed I had the wrong page number. So my next reference is in relation to page 148 of the main pack, or 141 of the redacted pack. Sorry, the track changes version. So I'm just going to jump to that one myself. And this is in relation to questions by members at council. So again, this is a number of issues have been raised with the working group in terms of questions by members. We dealt with earlier on in relation to the order of business for council meetings for where they should sit on the agenda. That was agreed in the part 2 section. But the principal issues here were in relation to the length of questions and answers to questions from members. At the moment, there is no provision in the Constitution that limits that. There was then also questions around what should happen to questions that are not asked because we run out of time. You didn't reach a conclusion on that particular issue because there were many pros and cons of various options. But in order for us to include a question in the minutes, it has to be asked at a meeting. It's got to be part of the procedures, unless it is in the Constitution that is an action. So at the moment, the procedure is that a member may clearly wish to have that question asked at the next meeting and defer it, or they may ask for a written response after the meeting. And the third point really was in relation to the duration of the length of time for questions. At the moment, the total time is 30 minutes. And again, you considered that point. You drew a conclusion as a group that was sufficient time, that shouldn't be extended, but you did agree, and hence the alteration in the procedure rules is that the time limit for speeches should be extended to questions and answers to questions. So procedure rule on page 148, I want to say that, but that again is not showing the right number, is it? Sorry, forgive me. Sorry, which one is it?
13.5 and 13.6.
13.5 and 13.6, apologies. So this is on page, it is page 148. Sorry, my screen didn't jump down.
It's at the top of the page.
Yeah, so paragraph 13.5, 13.6, so 13.5 at the end of that states sentence indicates that no speech, question or response to a question will exceed 3 minutes. So I don't know whether you wish to discuss that one, Chair, or wish to move on.
Well, I'll wait to see whether members of the committee would like to discuss. Somebody has, yes, Councillor Rice.
Yes, it wasn't on any of those points that you raised, but it was on the same pages. So page 141, 13.4, only one councillor to stand at a time. My recent experiences of when I was wanting to speak whilst sitting, I wondered whether that could simply be changed to only one councillor to speak at a time, because that seems to be the emphasis of the paragraph, is about councillors speaking one at a time. And to just change that so that a councillor can choose to either sit or stand whilst they speak, but the main emphasis remains that it's one councillor to speak at a time.
Um,
13.4. Councillor Rice, I take your point. I think it's a valid one. I think we need to have a look at that, because there's also something in there around councillors standing up when they shouldn't, which is in some instances an indication that they wish to speak. So there's also the question of indicating the wish to speak as well as speaking. But I do understand your position, and let's have a think about that and see whether or not we can come up with some drafting that will clarify the point.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rice. Councillor Fear.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to, I understand where Councillor Rice is coming from, but for me, I think it on that point should stay the same, because a member should ideally stand, and then obviously if there is unrest in the chamber, the chairman stands, which then indicates all members must sit and are not allowed to be heard. So I feel if we don't, it kind of flows into one into the other. So I feel a member, if they are speaking, they should stand, and if they're not, they should be sat. I think that's just convention, and how things have just worked. And like that isn't about if you want to prefer sitting or standing. It's just that's the person that's holding it, and the only person that can stop them speaking is the chair whilst they stand. So that's just my view on it. Thank you, Chair.
Did you want to come back, Councillor Rice?
Yes, well, I suppose anybody that has a physical disability that prevents them from being able to stand, it seems a little unnecessary to have it in there. I have been informed that the chair has a discretion to allow councillors to sit if they make a specific request. So I have been given permission to sit, but it just struck me as a little odd to have this in here. and the emphasis did seem to be about controlling the number of councillors that speak at the same time. So yeah, I understand your points, Councillor Fear, but I suppose I would still request that it is changed. Thank you.
Ms. Syce?
Chairman, I just wanted to come and say that she has received a dispensation, if you want to call it, or the exercise of discretion from the chair. And until such time as we can think, because this question of standing to speak is threaded throughout the Constitution, and we may need a wider review of everything before we can change just this one paragraph, because there will be others elsewhere. And I don't feel that it touches on discrimination necessarily, not that that's what you were saying, but I think we need to look at it in the round. But for the moment, if you could just continue to exercise that discretion from the chair, and we'll see if we can bring it to a further working group, if that would be satisfactory to you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms. Syce. I think that's the thread of how we're dealing with issues that need to be reviewed, that we will bring them back rather than fettering what's going forward to full council on this occasion. Councillor Filer.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm just going on a bit. You might prefer me to wait. I was going on to 1319, which was the respect for the chair. So would you like to finish the other bit first, or have we finished it?
I think we've finished that bit, but I think we now have to go back to Mr. Jones to introduce the next bit. So if you can come back afterwards, that would be helpful. Thank you. Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Chair. And actually, I've got a couple of points on 13.17 and 13.18. So that will then lead you into that one, Councillor Filer, perhaps once we've disposed these ones. These are not in your report, so apologies for that. But actually, since publishing the agenda, 13.17 and 13.18 start in relation to points of order and personal explanation. State a councillor may rise on a point of order. Now, these apply to committees as well, and of course we do have co-opted members on committees. So I would suggest and ask that we could change a councillor may to a committee member may, or a member of the meeting may. Sorry, apologies. So a member of the meeting may then rise or raise a point of order or personal explanation, because it is limiting it just to councillors. So I apologise, that's not in the existing list of recommendations, but that's one that we've identified since publishing.
Thank you for that. I think it just follows through from your explanation, actually. So if you'd like to move on to the next one, please.
The next paragraph then jumps on. So I don't know whether you wish to, as we're in, Councillor Filer was relating to the 13.19, I think it was, respect for the chair.
I'm trying to coordinate where you are and where Councillor Filer is. So yes, if you could do that, Councillor Filer.
So again, just before you start, Councillor Filer, so this is on page 150 of the clean version and 143 of the track changes version.
Yep. So this is respect for the chair, which I don't. We got an awful lot of information when this council first started, and I don't think all members have properly understood this. I'm a bit hot on proper process and respect for the chair. So I think absolutely essential that people understand that they should sit down if the chair rises, and they normally wouldn't rise unless it was something quite serious. And similarly, I read somewhere, and I don't know if it's this paragraph, Richard, or it's somewhere else. It was somewhere when I was reading this report before, and I didn't annotate it, that I thought was wrong, where it said the chairman's decision cannot be challenged. You'll know where that is. It's somewhere around, and we might be coming on to it later. And I disagree with that. That's the first thing I disagree with that when we do come to it. And the last thing is that this question of proper behaviour during a council meeting, so that if you want to get up and you want to leave for personal reasons, I believe you should. I don't know whether this is still going to carry on in this council, but I think it should. I think you stand at the door and you bow your head. That's how it was always done in the previous councils, as respect to the mayor. And I don't think the chairman should be any less respected than bowing your head. It's what happens in a court of law. It's really not. It's not demeaning in any way. But I might be outvoted on that one. But I do think that if the chairman makes a decision, if the whole meeting thinks that's a perverse decision, it's not a referee in a football match. I think we should be able to properly challenge that and get an opinion, perhaps from the monitoring officer or from the chief executive. That's it.
Right. So I can't see where that is in this proposed set of changes to the Constitution, unless Mrs. Ice can help me on it.
We're looking for it ourselves, Chair, because my understanding of our constitution at present is that the monitoring officer's ruling on process and procedure is the final one at a council meeting. But we'll certainly continue to look for it I'll continue to look while Mr. Jones carries on with the.
I wouldn't rush too much. It's somewhere written in red on the track changes one, and I saw it, and frankly I didn't know how to annotate it on the computer, but it's not important enough for you when we're in a busy meeting for you. I'm sure we'll come across it sooner or later.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jones, could you carry on, please?
Thank you, Chair. I've certainly lost my page now in my version because I was looking for that particular provision. But the next one is on page 152 of the clean version and 145 of the tracked changes version. And this is in relation to voting at council. So provision 17.1. With the number of councillors we've got, it has, over the last few meetings, we've had circumstances where there's been a clear majority in favour of a motion, and the chairman has accepted that and moved on to business. Sometimes asking for the votes for any member wishing to vote against or abstain to do so, but this is just putting that into practice, so that into black and white, that where a vote is quite clear and there is a clear majority in favour, that the chairman shall seek the views of members who haven't voted for the motion to indicate whether they wish to vote against or abstain from that vote. That doesn't preclude or remove the provision where an individual member may wish for their individual vote to be recorded after the vote is taken, but it's just we believe it's more open and transparent in terms of its decision making. And I'll pause there, Chairman, for that particular item.
Yes,
we did raise this one with leading members and unaligned members at one of our engagement meetings as well, and actually that was the general view that would be a sensible provision as well.
Yeah. Councillor Filer.
Sorry, Chair, if my hand's still up, I will take it down. It's legacy.
Okay. Councillor Fear.
No, sorry, don't think my hand was up. Sorry, Chair.
As well. Thank you. Mr. Jones, could you proceed?
I can, and perhaps for future reference, one to pick up, because I think I found the provision that Councillor Filer was referencing. So on page 153 of the clean version, and forgive me, I haven't got the, but it's Procedure Rule 21, Interpretation of Procedure Rules. I believe this is the one you're referring to, Councillor Filer, and it says, oh, I just clicked off it. It states that the ruling of the person presiding as to the construction or application of any of these procedure rules, or as to any proceedings of the council, shall not be challenged at any meeting. So we may need to review that one perhaps and add it to a list if you're so minded, Chairman.
So we would need to take that back for future consideration, I think is what you're saying, isn't it, Mr. Jones?
Thank you, Chairman. We'll make a note of that and add it to the list.
I do have a hand that's been raised, but I don't know who it's from.
Councillor Judy Butt.
Councillor Butt, Jude's Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence. Sorry, I'm really unclear about this last point about whether I was at the leaders, I was representative for the group leaders meeting of which Richard alludes to, and we did discuss this, and I believe the record, our thoughts were that we wanted those for, those against, and those who were abstaining, so the public could see how people were voting. I'm just a little confused. Is that what's been put forward, or is that what's just that we're going to take the majority vote and we're not going to ask for those who vote against and those who are abstaining. Thank you. I just asked for some clarity. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Forgive me, Chairman, if I may just clarify then. So we certainly will be seeking the in terms of the process, the chairman will ask for an indication of those who wish to vote in favour. If there is a clear majority of hands, they will not be counted at that point. But upon the chairman accepting that, he will then ask if any members wish to vote against, and there will be a show of hands of those members, and we will count those hands. And then there will be a show of hands for those who wish to abstain, and again we will have a count of those hands.
Thank you for that clarification. I'm most grateful. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Butt. Mr. Jones, would you like to proceed?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So page 154 of the clean version and 147 of the track changes version. This is in relation to Rule 24, disorderly conduct by councillors, and it's adding a provision in to that the person presiding at the meeting shall initially warn a member of their conduct before allowing a motion to be moved to silence or exclude that member. So it's altering Procedure Rule 24.
Thank you. Councillor Cox.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, it's not about that actually. It was about the previous one to do, I think it's 22.1. Strikes me as quite restrictive that you have to put a substitute in from the same political grouping. And I just wondered if there was any flexibility that it could be built in there, because it may be appropriate, maybe better for the council that if it wasn't possible to get a substitute from your same political group, you're very happy for another one to do the same. I'm sorry, I'm not with you as to where you are in the 22
changes.
22.1 interpretation of procedure rules. It says a political group may by notice nominate their representative. And it says appoint a substitute member from within its group. And it strikes me that that's a bit restrictive, and that we should look to loosen that and enable them to appoint who they want, really, frankly.
I could ask Ms. Nice to comment, please.
Well, Chairman, I'm happy to.
Okay, I don't mind. Carry on, Mr. Jones.
Chairman and councillors, the allocation of seats to political groups is determined by council in accordance with the political balance rules. You are not permitted to gift seats. That is not a lawful option available to political groups. So this is effectively, and I appreciate you're talking about substitute members, but on a substitute is a temporary member of that committee, and therefore it must be allocated. That seat must be filled and allocated by that political party to political group to which it was allocated. It wouldn't be possible to cross-party the allocations of substitutes.
Fair enough.
So, Mr. Jones, you concluded Rule 24, I think. So I'll take questions on that one. Councillor Rice.
Yes, no, I just was pleased to see the changes on page 47 about the councillor not to be heard, and adding in that procedure. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that your business, Mr. Jones, on part 4, I think. So I'll go to the recommendation. And before I ask for agreement, I think under the Rule 1.1, the August recess, I recall that Councillor Cox, you were not in favour of this, but I don't think any other members still felt likewise. Are you still opposed to this in the way it's drafted? You are.
Yes.
Right. So we'll presumably have to take a minority recommendation through. Is everybody else in agreement with the changes as set out by Mr. Jones in part 4? Anybody dissent from that? There is a hand here, and I'm trying
It's
to check.
Councillor Bartlett, Chair.
Is it Councillor Bartlett?
Thank you, Chair. It was actually related to para 24.1. Is it all right to go back to that?
I was hoping we'd concluded this part,
Yeah,
but briefly, if you could, please.
Yeah, it's 24.1. It's whether the individual councillor be not further heard, whether it is for the item, the agenda item only, or for the remainder of the meeting. Because you know, it's entirely feasible that a member maybe get excited about one particular agenda item, and but you know, there's no reason why they couldn't participate in the remainder of the meeting. What you're basically saying is they can stay in the meeting but not be heard on anything else for the rest of the meeting, which seems slightly absurd. You might as well tell them to leave if you can't participate in the meeting. So I think that 24.1 needs to be clarified a bit as to how long the councillor should not be heard for, whether it's for the remainder of that agenda item or for the remainder of the meeting.
I suspect it's about the intention of this particular clause, but Ms. Seiss, would you like to comment in response?
Thank you, Chair. As things stand, the interpretation of that clause is that they may not be heard, period. So that's for the remainder of the meeting. But of course, it's within the gift of Audit and Governance to recommend to Council that be amended and restricted, or that the Chair possibly makes it clear at the time, depending on the circumstances, whether they wish it to be for the remainder of the meeting or, in fact, one item.
I suspect, Councillor Bartlett, that if we followed your line of argument, we would need to have two sanctions available, not just the one. Unless it is up to the chair to decide which of those two options to take from time to time.
Yeah, of course, you've already got two sanctions there, because what you're saying is that they can't participate, but if they say anything again, then that would be misconduct. And then at that point, at any point later in the meeting, if they wish to participate in a debate, then the fact that they've spoken will be misconduct, and they'll have to be asked to leave the meeting. I have real problems with that one.
Well, therefore, the only way forward on that is the two sanctions that I suggested a moment ago. One for the rest of the meeting and the other for that item. So it would need to be redrafted to accommodate that. Is that something which, for clarity, Ms. Seiss, could be done?
Yes, Chair.
I don't think you can throw it away on its own. I think you have to have both sanctions available to the chair of the meeting. Councillor Fear.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, very, very briefly, because I know we've got to move on. Just to clarify on that last point from Councillor Bartlett, if a member's silenced for the remainder of the meeting, it's still important that they stay for that remainder of the meeting because they are still allowed to vote. The next step, obviously, is them to leave the chamber, which then they wouldn't be able to vote. So I think they're the kind of clarifying lines on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Rice.
Yes, I completely agree with Councillor Bartlett, actually, and I think he raised a very valid point that I had meant to raise, or he's reminded me about it. I think it's perfectly reasonable to add in there that it would be for the remainder of that item to be discussed. Most likely a councillor is getting agitated about that particular item. If there's an issue on the next item, then the chairperson can choose to use 24.2 or 24.1 again. So I don't think we need anything that says that they can't speak for the rest of the meeting. It just seems incredibly childish.
Well, I think it's a matter of degree. I think that's what the issue is. And so we can't judge that other than to have both sanctions available is the logical conclusion, I think, to that. Ms. Seiss.
Chair, thank you. I would just share my experience with members of the committee in other authorities where there has been disorderly conduct conduct by a member not only associated with a particular item, but constantly in regard to the proceedings as a whole, or possibly a personal attack on someone in the chamber. And it does become very time consuming then for the chair to have to exercise that option for every single item, because the behavior will just be repeated on and on. There are circumstances like that that do arise. So I would recommend that we do have both sanctions available.
So I hope the proposal to have both sanctions available is one that this committee can accept going forward. And I think you have to be conscious of the position of the chair in those circumstances, needing both sanctions to be available, because to contain a situation that is obviously going to be volatile in those circumstances, it has to be decisive. It can't be something that is allowed to run and run. And if it is allowed to run and run, it's likely to bring the meeting or indeed the council into disrepute. So that's the balance to that. So I think if Ms. Seiss, you were able to redraft along those lines, I think that probably satisfies all the arguments that we've heard. Nobody want to come back on that again? Are you happy that we proceed in that way, please? Councillor Cox?
Yeah, I'm happy. Oh.
Councillor Cox? You're on mute, Councillor Cox.
Apologies, I think Felicity was first on that one, but
I've called you.
All right, okay. The point I would make is that I think the sanction against the particular motion or item should come first, and if it was repeated, then you do the second sanction. So I don't think you should have. I don't think they should have a carte blanche immediately, depending on. But I think you should have the sanction on that particular motion first. If it's repeated, then fine.
That's regardless of the matter of degree, I take it from what you're saying.
Yes, I think so, yeah.
And if the matter of degree was extreme, from the point of view of somebody chairing such a meeting, does that put them in a position that is untenable? I think it does.
The chair?
In order to be able to control the meeting and the behaviour of an individual, that sanction needs to be available, surely.
I think it would be best, wisest to take the lower sanction first. But you've got a fair point that if it's extreme, then yes, yeah. If somebody would have to be excluded, but they should be excluded from the meeting, not just not to ban them from speaking for the rest of the meeting. That seems petty. If you're going to stop somebody speaking, stop them speaking for the motion. If their behaviour is extreme, I recognise that might be the case, then they should be banned from the meeting, frankly.
Did you indicate, Ms. Seiss? I thought you'd.
I did, Chair. I didn't necessarily. I hope this adds something to the meeting, and that is that Councillor Cox might be reassured that what we're proposing tonight is that there is a warning system before the first sanction, and I would suggest that the chair does need both of those to be available to him at the first instance, having issued the warnings.
Thank you. Councillor Rice?
I'm happy enough with that. I had a separate issue to raise briefly.
Thank you. Is yours on this first issue, Councillor Fear?
It is, Chairman.
Can we take that and then I'll go back to Councillor Rice?
Yeah, if I just conclude this very briefly, then the warning system's there. That will help the chair. We don't want to restrict the chair in the process of full council, and there's nothing about being petty. If a member's being rewarded that sort of sanction, that's probably because they're the one being childish, and the chair has to act accordingly. So hopefully we can move on from that. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Rice, your other point.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to have a brief discussion on the number of questions that members of the public can ask, and I was wondering where there are 4 questions and the limit of 100 words is common practice. I know that some residents were quite surprised at this, so if I could get some comments on that.
Ms. Seiss.
I can't speak in the country, but many councils have some sort of limitation just in the interests of being able to attend to council business in its widest form. So the threshold which this council sets is up to this council. I know of one council at least, but that is a small borough council that has no limit, and the meetings do in fact go on till 3 or 4 in the morning. But I feel that much of the feedback we've had as officers has been that councillors do want to contain the length of these meetings to a sensible degree, provided the opportunity for members of the public and councillors themselves to speak and so on is still safeguarded. So I think it's a question of proportionality and a subject for councillors to debate and express their views on to full council. Thank you.
Thank you. Your hand's still raised, Councillor Rice. Did you wish to respond?
Oh. Well, I suppose I'd just come back. If anybody, like, I don't have a strong opinion on it, but I just wanted to raise it in case anybody wanted to sort of increase the limit.
Well, I think one of the things around the constitutional review process is that there is an element of taking forward the measures, and it's unlikely that in many cases we'll get complete agreement on everything, and we see how it goes, and we can always then refer back at a later stage to the Constitutional Review Steering Group if it is felt by members that it isn't working satisfactorily. That to me seems the methodology that we're building up in this new council, and it's certainly one that I would support. So we may find, or we may not find, that works, and if we find it doesn't work, we can always review it again, because otherwise we'll never make a decision and we'll never get it through council. With the exception of Councillor Cox over the issue of the August recess, are we in agreement with the proposed changes to Part 4 of the procedure rules? Anybody object to that? Excellent. Now, I did promise a comfort break for 8 o'clock, but we were partway through procedures at Part 4 at that stage. I propose that we take a 5-minute comfort break now, and then we can come back to deal with just the final Part 6, which Ms. Zeiss is leading on. So if we could just coordinate, it's 8:31 now. Could we reconvene at 20:36, please? Welcome back. We're now on to part 6, and Ms. Zeiss, you're going to introduce this.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. So I'll start us off on pages 167 of the substantive pack, the clean copy, and 185 of the track changes copy. You will see that we've incorporated a series of protocols into the Constitution that previously were not embodied in it. There were 2 reasons for this. One was that there was not a previous practice of retaining everything that didn't have to be agreed by council in one place. But we felt after discussion, and officers discussed this amongst themselves, that even though some of these protocols need to be approved by full council, others don't, but it's still best to have them all in one place so that they're readily available for everybody to see and access. Since the publication of the agenda, however, we've identified that the Planning Committee protocol for public speaking has not been included in this draft, and it will be added to the final version when published. I don't know, Chair, if you want that to come back to the Constitutional Review Group. I don't necessarily think that would be needed, because it's not up for amendment or change or anything like that. It's just merely a question of placing it in the right position in the Constitution.
If there are no changes, I'm sure that the committee will be in agreement with processing in that way.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Then I'm going to refer councillors, please, to pages 167 of the clean version and 185 of the tracked version. I'm just going to move to that myself. This shows that in the index, or in the list of the protocols that are in the Constitution, it separates those codes that require council approval and those which are local protocols and can be amended by the relevant committees. So that makes it clear the status of each of those protocols. Then moving on to page 181 of the clean copy and 199 of the track changes copy. Again, I'm just scrolling down, please bear with me. Richard has a very clever shortcut, but I don't always get that right. This is the arrangements for dealing with allegations of breach of code of conduct. Previously, there was a recommendation made to full council for adjustments to the role of the monitoring officer at the outset of investigation of complaints. On reading what had been drafted then, I don't think it was particularly clear. So we wish to make a recommendation back to this committee and on to council that this be clarified by the drafting that you see in front of you, which has the effect of saying that a monitoring officer can look at a code of conduct complaint initially. They can either immediately reject the claim on the complaint on the grounds that it falls outside of the scope of the code of conduct, or the monitoring officer can determine that there's no breach of the code and no further action need be taken, or they can enter into a very light touch informal resolution if appropriate. So in other words, if it's one of those complaints, and I'll give an example to bring this to life. Quite a number of complaints I receive as monitoring officer from members of the public are to the effect that a councillor hasn't replied to their emails. And those are normally quite easily addressed by me ringing up the particular councillor saying, this person is not happy that you haven't responded to their emails. They say, oh my goodness, you know, I've got such a heavy caseload that must have just slipped my mind. I'll send a response straight away, and that's the end of it. And so that's the sort of thing that would be done by informal resolution. Or that the monitoring officer refers the complaint on to the chair of standards committee for consideration, and the rest of the procedures then fall into place. It just clarifies what that monitoring officer should do and shouldn't do in those early stages. We've also added to this, just for clarity, it's not a change, the criteria, which are further down the page at number 3, which is a repeat of the criteria that we use when assessing any of our codes of conduct. We measure them, we measure them against these criteria. And so we thought it best to set them out in the Constitution so that they are visible to everybody. I'll pause at that point, Chair, if anyone wants to ask any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Zeiss.
Okay, then we go further on to page...
Just a moment, Councillor Cox.
Beg your pardon, beg your pardon.
Councillor Cox.
Sorry, I don't know whether this may not be in here, but in terms of complaints by councillor on councillor, I know there was got a movement to restrict them, to stop, to limit them. And my proposal would be, can we not just ban them? Because it seems there's an awful lot of pettiness goes on between councillors sometimes, and if you just ban them, then that would just sort that out.
Ms. Syce?
I don't feel that I'm at liberty to express an opinion on that particular matter, Chair.
Well, I think it's another one of those issues, Councillor Cox, that certainly could come back to the Constitutional Review Steering Group in the future. It's not one that's proposed in here, having gone through that process already. I can't help but be generally supportive of what you're saying, but of course there will be exceptions where such a process may be necessary, I'm supposing.
Yeah, I agree that sometimes councillors, councillor may behave badly and they maybe need to be subject to. But if it's that bad, then whoever it is, I'm sure there's a member of the public would stand up and make the complaint rather than a councillor on councillor. It just seems to be ridiculous position that we find ourselves in at the moment. Anyway, that's my opinion.
Could you continue, Ms. Syce?
Certainly, Chair. Certainly. So the next major addition to this section of the Constitution is at page 190 of the clean copy and 208 of the track changes version, which is the introduction or the placement into the Constitution of a new code of best practice relating to planning matters. This applies to every councillor, irrespective of whether or not they are a member of the Planning Committee, and it's supplemental to and should be read in conjunction with the Code of Conduct for Councillors. So it's like an augmented code of conduct for members in relation to Planning Committee matters. Future iterations of this code will be considered and have to be approved by Audit and Governance Committee for further adoption by Council. So that's all set out there in the Constitution. And that brings me, Chair, to the end of that section. And I wonder if you would like to pause to consider the recommendation there.
Yes, and for the benefit of members, we have the head of planning as well as the chair of planning committee with us this evening. Councillor Phipps.
Yeah, thank you. Hang on. I've got some notes and I'm going from page, obviously from the screen to a different page and all the rest of it. 215 and 216, if I can just bring those up. Hang on, I'm getting there. I had that carryings on with it going blank before as well, so I don't want it to happen again. I don't know what happened there. Right, yeah, 215, training. I just wanted to ask about that. There's nothing in there that mentions training for substitutes, I suppose, or that if substitutes are brought in for a meeting that they had to have had training. So I wondered if there was any comment on that. And then on 216, which is the next page, site visits. Yeah, this is I wasn't too sure about whether I was 100% on this, how decisions on site visits are reached, because I would have thought that if there was a big application of some sort, like a huge housing development or something like that, or a gravel extraction or something big, that it would be a matter of course that there should be a site visit. I just go back to an example that happened a month or so ago, whereby the agenda was published, as it says, then a member of the committee can ask for a site visit. But that meant that suddenly within a week, they had to allocate another whole day for site visits. And then half the planning committee, if not more than half of them, couldn't make it. And it all was a bit of a, didn't work out too well, because we ended up with all sorts of substitutes in the committee. And I'm just wondering if there should be some more clarification on these site visits, certainly for big applications. I'll leave it there, but there's just the two issues of the training and the site visits. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Phipps. Could I ask Mr. Perrins, please, to address those two issues? Mr. Perrins.
Thank you, Chair. So in respect of the first item, training, yes, we do recognise this point, but in the formation of the document, it was felt we couldn't insist upon mandatory training for any member, because it makes it, a very, it's not something you can insist upon as a council. And what we've chosen instead in the paper is to make sure that we run sufficient training and make sure we promote it as much as possible to all members. And we obviously will work with Democratic Services to log that. So we do understand the point, but we felt that at this stage we can't make it mandatory, but we feel it's something which can be kept under review, of course, as we go forward. The second point about the site visits. Now, this is something which the Planning Committee originally adopted. I believe this is basically just putting it into the Constitution, so it's not a change or a new policy. It's very much just making sure it's placed into the Constitution. And I do understand the point as well. And by and large, if there's a big application, then there has been site visits in the past. It's obviously been a bit more difficult in recent times with COVID and so forth. So, but I think the provisions they have been working, but we do understand the point. So I think it's one of those situations where we probably also keep it under review as well, if that was okay.
Sorry, I didn't get that last little bit. You're breaking up a little bit for me. I don't know about for anybody else. What was that last little sentence? I'm sorry.
Sorry, apologies. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I was just basically saying this one we should keep under review. It's worked well to date, but we'll keep it under review in terms of, how and when we should have site visits.
Okay, well, it's just the big applications. I would have liked to seen something in there about site visits, but I think if that can be taken on board, that's the main thing. Thank you.
Thank you for those points, Councillor Phipps. Nobody else has indicated, but certainly from my perspective, substitute members of the Planning Committee who have not gone through the training are at a disadvantage personally, and they're at a disadvantage as far as determining planning applications are concerned. And so I wonder whether there is or could be a move towards the formation of a pool of councillors who've been through training who may not be permanent members of the Planning Committee, in order that they can at least be considered first as substitutes, because I think it's really important, and I think experience teaches that there is benefit to be had if they have been through the training. I don't know whether that's the direction of travel the Planning Committee are planning to go in or not. Can you comment on that, Mr. Perrins?
I certainly wouldn't be averse to it. It's very much, I would say it's a member decision for this committee to recommend. I mean, it can be done, and we can certainly look to have a sort of a pool of named councillors. I guess there's always the issue, and it probably won't happen. What happens if those pool of councillors aren't available? So I think as long as it's clear that it's obviously beneficial and it'd be preferred to have a pool of councillors ready to step up who've been trained. It is not necessarily an absolute requirement, just in case we can't get hold of said councillors on the day, which will be very rare, I admit. I have no problem with the suggestion at all.
As long as it's not being ignored because of resources, that would be my concern. So provided you've got the resources available, then presumably it would be in the interest of planning committee if they were to encourage more members to go through training anyway. Thank you. Ms. Nice.
Chair, I think the training will be provided. I think we will prioritise that by way of resources, but I might also suggest that perhaps groups might agree amongst themselves which of their number will be in the trained pool. so that each group has a reserve, each political group has a reserve of members who can occupy those positions. I know it makes it more difficult for the independent and unaligned members, but that might be a practical way of addressing it.
Thank you, that's helpful. Nobody else has indicated. So I think that concludes part 6, doesn't it, Ms. Zeiss?
It does, Chair.
Yes. So could I go to the recommendation on part 6, which is that subject to the inclusion of the Planning Committee protocol for public speaking, the proposed changes to part 6 be adopted. Anybody dissent from that as our decision? No. Excellent. So could I, that concludes the various parts of the Constitution. Councillor Rice?
Yes, just a very small aspect, 5 point in that section. There was a chairman there again. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that concludes the various parts of the Constitution, and I'm very grateful to Mr. Jones and to Ms. Zeiss for setting those out so clearly for us this evening. It's been a huge amount of work. I appreciate what has gone into it from a number of other officers as well to get us to this stage. I'd like to go back now, if I may, to the two recommendations for the committee to make this evening. The first of which is that the views and recommendations of the Constitution Review Working Group, as set out in this report at paragraphs 19, 25, 36, 44, 60 and 67 be supported. We've gone through those individually, and with I think we've come to the conclusion on each of them that they are supported. Perhaps that's only a majority in 2 cases, and so we need to take that recommendation forward to Audit and Governance and on to Council. So could I have your agreement that we do that, please? Anybody dissent from that? No. And secondly, as I indicated earlier, B of the recommendations is that necessary and consequential technical and formatting related updates and revisions to the Constitution be made by the monitoring officer in accordance with the powers delegated, and that includes any typos or any other issues, many of which have been raised by Councillor Rice and some by other members as well. So could I have your agreement to that? Nobody dissenting from that, I would assume. Excellent, very good indeed. That brings us to the close of our business for this evening. Thank you all very much indeed for your input, and that is both applicable to members of the committee and officers, and indeed those members who are not on the committee who've made input this evening. It's very much appreciated, and I think has been very supportive of the work we've been trying to take through this evening. Councillor Filer?
I'd just like to say thank you to Councillor Williams and whoever else was on that little group, because it's a fantastic piece of work. Very comprehensive. It must have taken you ages and ages. It's very impressive. And thank you very much. I think it was, and certainly thank you to Susan and Richard. I mean, the questions we were asking tonight were really difficult and they were jumping all over the place, but it was a tour de force from everybody. Very impressive. Thank you.
Yes, and to record actually the members of the Constitutional Review Working Group, chaired by Councillor Williams, vice chaired by Councillor Butt, and the other members were Councillor Brooke, Councillor Trent and myself. And I'm very pleased with the obvious amount of work that members of this committee have put in preparation for this evening's meeting, and as I said earlier, the huge amount of work done by officers to get us to this point. And my hope is that we can take this through into Council and have some general agreement over the issues that we've taken forward, always with the caveat that we will look again at other issues in the process that we've set out. So thank you very much indeed, and I close the meeting at 20:57.